Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. As usual, we'll start with a couple of announcements and some quick news stories. One of the more important announcements is tomorrow night, March the 20th, Houston Normal will have their monthly meeting at 7:30 p.m. at the West Gray Cafe at 415 West Gray Street. And while we're speaking of Normal, they brought out today the first issue of their new newsletter, which will appear quarterly, the Cannabis Catalyst at Houston Normal. It will be available in paper and also on their website. And I have to admit that I'm kind of proud of it, because in this issue we have the first installation of what I expect will be my regular column called Marijuana Musings. So look it up and let me know what you think about it. There have been some rather unusual news stories recently. The first one is extremely important to a very few people, but I think it's worth mentioning because it is so crucial for those that it concerns. New guidelines have been issued for primary care physicians, particularly emergency room doctors, treating acute patients with chest pains that might be heart attacks. It's now recommended that the doctors expressly ask about recent cocaine use. The reason for this is that adverse cocaine reactions present almost exactly the same symptoms as a heart attack, but the underlying conditions are quite different. And the two major drugs that are administered immediately to almost all suspected heart attack patients end up having almost exactly the opposite effect on cocaine cases and can be deadly. For one thing, one drug is frequently given to heart attack patients to bolster their blood pressure. Since cocaine reaction causes high blood pressure anyway, the result can be blood pressure high enough to rupture blood vessels in the vein. So if you or any of your acquaintances are cocaine users, be sure and alert them to the importance of letting their doctors know about that use if they ever have need to be treated for serious chest pains. And for those few that this does affect, this could be crucial information. While we're on the story of cocaine, the Brazilian government announced this week that for the first time they discovered a coca plantation and a cocaine processing plant in Brazil on the headwaters of the Amazon. This is the first time that coca cultivation has spread out of the traditional Andean triangle of Colombia, Brazil, and Peru. Now, historically, cocaine's also been commercially produced in Indonesia and Hawaii, but this was some time ago. India is reporting that in some of their northern states, they're starting to see illicit poppy production with both opium and processed heroin being smuggled across the border to join the Afghanistan poppy crop. The ironic thing about this is about a month ago, the legal poppy growers in India, those growing poppies to produce medicinal morphine, codeine, oxycodone, and such, were petitioning the government to increase their allotted acreages because they were not able to make enough money growing legal opium to support their families. Just another example of how black market conditions create utter distortions in the laws of supply and demand and pricing. Okay, that's a little bit of the news lately. I'd like to introduce Clayton Jones, Vice President of Houston Normal, who's sitting in as my co-host tonight. Welcome, Clayton.
Hello.
And we are happy to have as a guest with us this evening Virginia McDavid. Jenny is a Democratic candidate for House District 138, and I believe you've got a runoff election coming up soon. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I am the Democratic nominee.
Oh, you are the nominee
I'm
now.
the outright
so
nominee
you're
for
just
the March 4th election. So
okay.
My big battle will be in November.
In November.
4th, yes.
And who's your opponent this year?
I am running against Republican incumbent Dwayne Bohack. It's Texas House District 138. Encompasses on the east end Oak Forest, Shady Acres, Garden Oaks, and on the west end parts of Spring Branch, west of Blaylock, more or less, and some other neighborhoods along 290 here in Houston.
Okay. Why did you decide to get involved in politics and run for office?
Well, Buford, I'm dissatisfied with our leadership out of Austin and don't feel like that they have true Texas priorities in mind when they're making some of the decisions. And I want to go and make a difference and feel like the diverse neighborhoods that are in District 138 aren't being adequately represented, and I want to go make a difference. And part of my campaign theme includes safe streets, sound bodies, and sharp minds. But the safe streets component involves being smarter on crime and not just tough, and that's why I'm really interested in this issue. And the fact I really think that the government needs to get out of regulating personal conduct and get to other matters at hand, such as education and having access to health care and things of that nature.
I noticed in some of your literature that you talk about both public schools and clean air and environmental issues.
Absolutely. My opponent is one of the Toxic 20, which is a label that the Houston Chronicle had come up with for his voting against some clean air amendments. And as you know, living here in Houston, we have some of the dirtiest air in the country, and we need to do what we can to clean that up. Texas ranks 7th in the world in carbon dioxide emissions if it were its own country, and 35 other states in the union have carbon action plans, and Texas is not one of them. It's not to say that it won't meet with resistance. The petrochemical industry is very strong in this community, but everybody wants to breathe clean air. It shouldn't matter what you do for a living. That's just something that we need to leave for our kids and grandkids, so that we're not destroying our environment.
I wouldn't mind paying a little extra to breathe clean air.
Right, and I think the public, as long as the public feels like their taxpayer dollars are being well spent, it's going to take a community effort, and no man or woman is an island, and this is something we have to address together. It's one ecosystem. So. And
I think one thing that's pretty obvious from what we've seen already is that the corporations that are in the businesses, which are major polluters, are going to resist as strongly as they can any changes that we try to make on them.
Absolutely. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which regulates clean air and water issues here in Texas, in my opinion, doesn't have enough teeth. They need more teeth to be able to enforce their laws, and they need better laws to enforce. And so we have a long ways to go.
Yeah, and I know the Environmental Protection Agency just is on the verge of releasing new regulations having to do with carbon dioxide emissions, something that they resisted until the Supreme Court directly ordered them to regulate a year ago, and apparently they're still not even coming down to the levels their own scientific boards suggest. But is carbon dioxide a major issue here in this area as well?
It's one of the issues. I mean, there's several pollutants. Ozone is obviously a bad one. Carbon dioxide. There's not any one in particular, but one of the things I wanted to point out, when the Clean Air Act passed in the 70s, people said it was going to put millions of people out of work, and there was a tremendous amount of resistance in passing the Clean Air Act. But what actually ended up happening was it created new business opportunities, new fields. I graduated from college in 1986, and there are now degree programs in the universities and colleges that didn't exist when I was in school. So people that are innovative and visionary and entrepreneurial are going to certainly have an opportunity to make money when we try and address these issues from a public policy standpoint in the near future.
Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed is that when companies really put their mind into reducing the release of pollutants, one of the effects on it is that it makes them run their own businesses more efficiently.
Absolutely.
So that they end up
Right.
actually saving money, although there may be some capital expenditure involved in getting set up in the first place.
Right,
But,
right. So
yeah.
we need to work with all stakeholders, I think, to come up with palatable solutions, but we need to be decisive and forceful in some instances.
Well, one thing I know I hear is that some of the polluting industries say, hey, it's not all our fault. Cars are doing a large part of it.
Well, I think what's going to have to happen is there needs to be shared sacrifice. Individuals don't need to feel like they're bearing the brunt of all the changes, and industry doesn't want to feel like they're bearing all the brunt. We need everybody to change their it needs to be a comprehensive approach and not single any one group or industry out, but that we're all working together towards the same goal. So.
You look like you were going to say something, Clayton.
No, it's just that the clean air is just such an important issue, especially for us here in Houston. I mean, I wake up and I live on the west side, and my chest is congested in the morning and at night. And I think that it's just such an important issue that everybody gets to hear and understand. It's
Absolutely, Clayton. I grew up with asthma. I grew up in West Texas. I'm originally from Lubbock.
Me too. Yeah.
Really good, but so I'm very unforgiving for anybody who pollutes my air. But another interesting, my opponent had voted against a bill this last session to set up a task force to study global warming, and not only does it impact our health, what we're doing in the environment, but we all spend more in the pocketbook too, because my husband's an avid fisherman, and he has gone fishing in Galveston after Thanksgiving and wade fished right after Thanksgiving in shorts, and he's catching Florida pompano, something that you wouldn't normally catch up this far. But it's getting warmer earlier in the spring. It's staying warmer longer in the fall. It's not cooling off in the evenings like it used to. So it's costing us in higher electric bills every time we write a check to our utility company because of higher air conditioning bills.
Of course.
So.
One of the things that strikes me as ironic is that right now we are struggling with $110 a barrel petroleum cost. We're facing a worldwide shortage. We're basically at the mercy of brutal dictators running places like Saudi Arabia. And at the same time, we're facing greenhouse gas problems with global warming. The interesting thing is we've got plenty of energy in this country to simply do away with using oil altogether, which solves both problems.
Well, the war is what's driven up the cost of our petroleum. When the war started, it was $25 a barrel.
Yeah, that's part
$27
of it. But we're also competing with rapidly growing customers like China and India. We're also increasing our own use of energy.
And the other problem with how high the price of a barrel of oil is since the American dollar has fallen compared to other worldwide currencies, oil is priced in U.S. dollars, and so as our dollar has cheapened, it's driven up the price of oil.
Yeah.
So, but you're absolutely right. People are looking for new discoveries, new ways to find additional oil, but there's no question that we need to start pursuing alternative energy sources to address some other issues, and it's not just accessibility.
Yeah. A few months ago, Scientific American had a major article in which they suggested that with very, very little development in less than 20 years, we could meet more than our total energy budget using solar energy, and that would use something only like 10% of the solar energy available in the country. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's time we started thinking big pictures instead of just trying to cut another mile per gallon off of our car mileages.
Yeah. A lot of problems to address. So.
It's time for us to take a short break, so we will be back in a minute or two.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Okay.
I just have to wait and see.
My turn.
Or I hadn't noticed it. We're back. Our guest tonight is Jenny McDavid, Democratic candidate for Texas House District 138. Clayton Jones is my co-host tonight, and I believe, Clayton, you wanted to say a couple of things about what's happening, especially in New England.
Yeah, New England seems to be a real hotbed for activity for decriminalization. New Hampshire, they just had a vote to decriminalize in the House, and the vote was 193 to 141 in favor of decriminalization. But the governor there says he doesn't care what the people want, he's going to veto it anyways. Vermont, they had a bill that went in February 15th that was passed, and it was sent up for the governor's signature, and it'll bring all marijuana offenses, small possession, down to a civil offense, which means you get a traffic ticket. In Massachusetts, right now, they're working a bill through the Assembly, and once it gets through the Assembly, it'll go out to the citizens of Massachusetts to vote on it to decriminalize marijuana use. Rhode Island, they just passed a bill that they have authorized nonprofit organizations to raise, cultivate, distribute to the patients on the state list as a nonprofit organization. Their governor also says that he's going to veto the bill, but Rhode Island's governor just doesn't seem to get his way because the House and the Senate has overridden his vote 3 times on decriminalization of marijuana.
Okay. That's something that has been kind of active in the Texas legislature for 2 or 3 sessions. Is first attempts to allow medical marijuana, second to change possession of small amounts of marijuana from a jail sentence misdemeanor to a Class C misdemeanor like a traffic ticket with simply a fine, and also a needle exchange bill allowing nonprofits and governmental agencies to provide sterile needles to injecting drug users and also to collect and dispose of used needles. These look like they're probably going to be somewhat issues this next session. Have you given any thought to any of those?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the state government needs to get out of the business of regulating personal or criminalizing personal conduct that isn't harmful to any other people. So I think a lot of this needs to be looked at because as a CPA, I like to look at numbers and I see what kind of dollars that we're spending prosecuting and incarcerating people with petty drug offenses or possession-only type offenses, and it's such a waste of taxpayers' dollars that could so much be better spent on other uses. The state of Texas used to spend over 50% of its budget, or help fund over 50% of education expenses statewide to our 1,100 school districts. That percentage is now down to 38%. We're the number one incarcerator in the country, and
over 171,000 prisoners in Texas now.
Absolutely, and prison business is big business, and
about 8% of the state budget last term, I believe.
Yeah, so we need to take some hard, serious looks on how we're prioritizing our money and how we can better spend it to help people. I know one thing that's grown really popular, and I'm reading about it in this Drug War Facts book by Douglas McVeigh, is drug courts. And I've heard people say it's such a better way to save taxpayers' dollars to spend $6,000 prosecuting someone and putting them through drug treatment versus $17,000 to incarcerate them. But what's interesting about the drug court process is that it still criminalizes behavior that may not be harmful to other people. And when someone has a record, it's hard to get a job. Sometimes people are using drugs because they're not gainfully employed. And if there is some sort of substance abuse problem where someone is using addictive drugs, they shouldn't have to get arrested to go get treatment. And so I think it's also pointing out what kind of health care crisis we have in this state, that if there are people out there that want treatment to get off any kind of drug addiction, and I want to preface anything I'm saying today that I don't advocate people going out there and necessarily using drugs that are going to be addictive or harmful to their lives, but I do think we need to be smarter in our approaches and in our way of trying to solve societal needs, and we have to do a better job.
I might also add that the largest part of the Texas State Mental Health Program is the prison system.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where most of our mentally ill end up.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend.
Ever since they closed the state schools, they put the mentally ill on the streets, and being mentally ill on the streets, where are they going to go?
And they're self-medicating, too.
Right.
Yeah.
They're abusing, and they're just going to spiral down. And states have just seen to think that better than state schools is prisons.
We have a caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hello, how y'all doing?
Hello. We're fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I want to know have you heard anything lately in reference to this shooting with Joe Horn? Now, I know that it went to the district attorney, or they're still investigating. But if I recollect, I do recall them saying it was going to take a couple of weeks, and they was going to get all the facts and then present the information to the district attorney or whoever. And I know it's been at least a month and a half or 2 months.
Okay.
I ain't heard nothing, and I want to know, have you heard anything about that?
Okay.
Thank you.
To bring the audience up to speed if they've forgotten, this is the case of the man who called 911 because his neighbor's house was being burglarized. While he was talking to the 911 operator, he picked up and charged a shotgun with the 911 operator telling him to stay in the house. He stepped outside. He shot 2 men who were probably the burglars next door. And the question is whether or not he should be charged with some sort of offense for the homicide. As the caller said, the last report we had was that it was being turned over to the district attorney for investigation and possible submission to the grand jury. And I have to say that I haven't heard anything more recent than what the caller had.
Well, the DA's office is under a lot of turmoil right now, so yeah, who knows? But I haven't heard anything either.
Yeah.
But speaking of the DA's office, that's another reason why I'm running, is we have one-party control of the executive branch and state government, one-party control of the state house, one-party control of state senate, and also the judiciary, and not everybody's voice is getting heard, and there's an arrogance of power that's developed. We've certainly seen that here in Houston, and we need some checks and balances. And that's one thing I hope to help restore.
Well, you have just hit what's probably my major hot button these days. And this is the district attorney's office, not only here in Harris County, but all across the United States. We can take my filing in North Carolina that jumped the gun in indicting the Duke lacrosse team, any number of others. The district attorney is probably the most important, most powerful elective office in the country. He can affect individuals much more than the president can. Yet he's the only official not subject to any kind of regular oversight or checks and balances.
Right.
And I'll get on my hobby horse here for just a minute if I can. I think the structure of the DA's office needs some radical changes. First, I think the public oversight duties, in other words, what happens to crooked cops or crooked cops that shoot people, what happens to prosecutors that step over the line, all of these functions need to be separated out from the district attorney. What about the crime lab? To prevent the conflict of interest from the district attorney having to investigate those he works in a partnership basis with every day. I think to the extent we want to keep the grand jury function, the grand jury should have its own separate attorney and legal advisor, and the DA should come to the district attorney as a supplicant, just like any other person with a complaint, and shouldn't be also the one asking them for action and at the same time being the supervisor telling them what to do. I think the DEA's office should be subject to total transparency, that all of their training manuals, all of their policy guides, all of their interview criteria for hiring new assistant district attorneys, all of their checklist or protocols for deciding whether a case is capital or not, anything that sets a policy and that does not have particularized information about individual cases, entire budget, for instance, should be made public and posted online. Okay. Now, that's an awfully big agenda, and I know you haven't thought about this, but I had to rant a little bit, but
we definitely need more transparency.
Yeah.
And another issue to point out when it comes to due process and making sure people are having their constitutional rights adhered to is, of course, here in Harris County, we have a court-appointed attorney process as opposed to the public defender office. I think Dallas has a public defender office. Austin has a court-appointed attorney process. And I've heard conflicting things. I'm trying to learn more about that, too, whether a public defender office would be better or if we should continue with our court-appointed attorney process. I heard that Senator Rodney Ellis may be introducing some legislation to
enforce it. Now, I believe the state law now allows a district or a county to adopt it, but doesn't require it. Now, one of the things, and I don't know, because once again, we're lacking transparency, one of the complaints has been that the appointed attorney system allows for political favoritism.
Yes, absolutely.
And that judges can appoint lawyers who support them politically or contribute to their campaigns. The other is they tend to appoint lawyers that move the docket quickly rather than fighting for their clients.
Right. I think definitely in larger counties, it may make sense to have the public defender office. Maybe in a smaller county where setting up the administrative costs, it just wouldn't be cost effective to do that. But I think definitely in a county
even there, and historically, Texas has had multi-county judicial districts its whole career. And I think that probably with district attorneys and public defenders both, we maybe should look at combining some of the small counties. They're telling me it's time for us to take another break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
this week in drug war. President Bush announces his intention to nominate Karen P. Tandy. March 22nd, 1972. The Richard Nixon appointed 13-member National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse recommends the decriminalization of marijuana and concludes.
And we're back. We're talking with Jenny McDavid, the Democratic candidate for House District 138. Good to be back again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so far we've kind of been batting all around the bush. We've talked a little about the environment and the district attorney and jail population. We have a caller now, though. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Buford.
Hi, Dean.
Clay and Jenny. Good to see you there on Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Jenny was our guest about 10 days ago on the Cultural Baggage Show, and she took a bold stance. I think she's a courageous person. I think we all need to thank her for her courage. She joined law enforcement against prohibition. She saw the need for change enough to do that. She visited with us at, where were we, Golden Corral. We had a gathering, the first ever meeting of Friends of LEAP. Had about 9 members show up and sign up. And I want to extend an invitation to anybody out there watching to, if they think this drug war is not going in the right direction, I invite them to join us, to email me if they would, Dean, D-E-A-N, at drugtruth, T-R-U-T-H.net. I also produce 9 radio programs each week about the horrors of the drug war, and I want to talk about a few of the other guests we've had on in the last couple of weeks. Just yesterday we had Mr. Doug McVeigh. He's Director of Research for Common Sense for Drug Policy. He was in Vienna, Austria, and he got a chance to meet with some great folks there. Boaz Wachtel, I think I pronounced that right, of the Greenleaf Party in Israel. Richard Elliott, Executive Director of the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network. Eric Carlin, Executive Director and mentor of the UK VNGOC. And Mike Trace, co-founder and coordinator of the International Drug Policy Consortium. This is the gathering of the UN, stuffed shirts, if you will. But there's also the gathering of the non-governmental organizations to put forward ideas on how we could best proceed into the future with this drug war. Folks out there probably don't know, but the UN was calling for the nation of Bolivia to stop using coca, which is like coffee here in America. And that's their mother coca. It's almost a religious sacrament to them. And the UN has the audacity to try to direct and control lives all around this world. They're all at the guidance of the United States. I'm sure most folks know that. I want to thank you for your discussion. I'm just going to tune in and listen. It sounds like y'all are right on track of everything. My radio shows air on KPFT radio. That's 90.1 FM here in Houston, 89.5 in Galveston. Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 11:30 to noon. I do my 2 half-hour shows, and most afternoons at 4:20 p.m. you can hear the 420 Drug War News. You can learn more about these radio programs by visiting our website, which is drugtruth.net. Buford, Clay, Jenny, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Dean.
We'll see you on the radio.
Speaking of prohibition, using that word, one thing I learned in this Drug War Facts book that Doug McVeigh has written is the number of deaths per 1,000 people, how during Prohibition in the early part of the 20th century, the 14 years that alcohol was illegal, we had about 10 deaths per 1,000 population, and it peaked again at 10 deaths per 1,000 population in 1980, since the drug war started in the early 70s. Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting to see how drug trafficking and the black market of drugs has contributed to violence in our society.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting along that line is that it's been a little over 10 years since Switzerland started their program of providing free heroin to addicts. And they define an addict as someone who has attempted rehabbed 3 times and failed. But since they began providing free heroin to addicts, they have not had a single overdose death in Switzerland, and that's been over 10 years now. So
it seems to me that people can function very well while they're taking their drug.
It depends on the drug.
Well, a heroin addict is, but I mean, they can maintain, they can go to work, they can have a family. They just have an addiction to a drug, which nobody thinks is right, but for what they make people do here today in the United States, you got to deal with the black market, you got to deal with all the wrong kind of people. You're looking at criminal activities, and you're looking at possibilities of going to prison. And people still do their hard drugs.
Well, there's certainly a number of functional alcoholics in this country, too. And the other interesting statistic I learned in this book is most violent crimes, if they are done under the influence of any drug, it's alcohol. And prohibition of alcohol didn't work. It still can be a very deadly drug, a very addictive drug. And we still should regulate it, as we should, DWI offenses, etc. But, I think we just need to rethink how we
Yes, I mean, since we've come into becoming more regulating of alcohol and tobacco, they're much better controlled than they were back in the 40s or the 30s when we had the people that were running alcohol, the bootleggers.
Well, I think the irony is that right now, teenagers have an easier time getting marijuana than they do getting tobacco or alcohol either.
Right.
Regulation works much better than suppression. And I might also add that we have reduced the use of tobacco in this country in about 50 years from being something used by over half of the adults in the country to something that's used by slightly over 20%. We've cut it more than in half, and we did it without sending a single person to jail. So education works.
Education, yes.
Public relations campaign.
Yeah. So we have another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hello, y'all.
Hello.
My name is Ruben. I had a comment and question.
Okay.
First off, I think that there's some drugs that they just need to go ahead and just forget about it and just legalize them. Marijuana is one of them. Just to me, it rates right there with cigarettes and alcohol. And there are some other drugs, though, that I do think that the government really, really needs to stay focused on because it does play into effect with violent crime, which is heroin and cocaine. I do think that those are two very serious drugs because they do lead to other things. But just want to know what y'all's opinion on that.
Okay, thank you. I think that one thing that's important is that we all need to distinguish between the effects of the drugs and the effects of the drug laws. Now, when heroin was legal, it literally cost the same thing as aspirin. The same company manufactured them and sold them for the same price. Illegal heroin now means that a user will spend from $100 to $500 a day to get enough heroin to meet his needs. That probably means he's not paying rent, he's probably eating out of the dumpsters, and he's probably committing property crimes. In some places, stealing car stereos is the most common, to pay for it, or in prostitution to pay for it. On the other side of that coin, since that $30 worth of heroin at aspirin prices has a wholesale value of about $100,000 as an illegal drug, we get the worst kind of vicious criminals in the world fighting for that money, which gives us the bloodbaths on the Mexican border, which gives us the Taliban in Afghanistan, which gives us street shootouts in Houston, and it also gives us horribly corrupt police and law enforcement. Because a good part of that $100,000 goes into paying off cops. One rash of crimes that goes across the country is police stealing heroin and cocaine from police property rooms to sell it on the streets. Mm-hmm. The problem is making drugs illegal doesn't make drugs unavailable. What it does is make them impure so that they hurt people, and it makes the law enforcement business corrupt, and it makes monsters into millionaires. Now, yeah, the world would probably be a happier place if cocaine and methamphetamine disappeared. But we're not going to make that happen by outlawing them. Sorry, I got on my soapbox again. So.
No, and I think the more addictive the drug, the more costly it can be for a person to try and feed that addiction, because it's an addiction, and they will pay any price and do just about anything to get access to that. And so, again, I think public relations and information, access to drug rehabilitation programs, and all the money that we're spending on law enforcement actually could be spent on drug rehab and better access to health care. We need more social workers to help some of these communities and some of these people.
Well, I think also one thing that's embarrassing the drug war establishment right now is that for 90 years now, our official policy on drugs has been to separate bad drugs, like heroin and cocaine and marijuana and LSD, from good drugs, which are those that the doctor gives you. But what we've been hearing for a couple of 3 years now is that kids aren't going out and abusing street drugs. What they're doing is taking the Vicodin pills from the parents' medicine cabinet, which is exactly the same drug inside the body as heroin. It's not a question of good drugs, bad drugs. It's a question of good or bad use of drugs. We need to switch the story from the thing to the actor.
Well, I think you bring up a very important point. There's a great deal of drug abuse with perfectly legal drugs. Heath Ledger died of, they say, perhaps a drug overdose, and it was prescription drugs and adverse reactions. I mean,
his case may not have even been drug abuse. It he was going to separate doctors, and they may have written independent prescriptions, not knowing about the other, and it accumulated.
Exactly.
Well, there was a young man, I think it was last month in Bear Creek, that died from an overdose of Valium that he had ordered online.
And one that has bothered me since it came out. About a year ago, we were buried with stories about a new form of heroin called cheese that was killing kids in Dallas. And I started getting suspicious because I was hearing prices for the drug that wouldn't buy enough heroin to get a mouse high. And it turns out that what happened here was the heroin was acting as a catalyst to boost the effect of the NyQuil cold medicine, or Tylenol cold medicine, which is primarily Benadryl. And the side effects of Benadryl, especially when boosted by an opiate, are hallucinations, seizures, and death. So here, the bad drug was Benadryl, which no one noticed, and they focused on the heroin, which served a very minor secondary effect in the drug.
Well,
so we focus in the wrong place.
Sudafed has ephedra in it, and I took it for years for allergies before they decided it's a harmful drug. But it's real interesting to see what makes the cut and what doesn't make the cut, and who's keeping certain drugs from not making the cut. So,
but
What we need to do is legalize, tax, and regulate.
Okay. It's time for another break, and we'll be back in another minute or two. Well, Jenny, I was happy to hear you say a few minutes ago a little slogan that I've been pushing for a while, and this is that it's time we got smart on crime instead of simply being tough on crime. Do you want to expand on that any in general? Or?
I will. I think we see a lot of pandering at the local, state, national level. Lock them up and throw away the key, and if law enforcement makes an arrest, they basically have solved the crime. And I have a friend who's a social worker in Lubbock, and she works for a hospital. And getting back to people who have mental illness, she ends up handling a lot of affairs for prisoners that get released from jail that maybe suffer from mental illness or some sort of substance abuse problem. They release them for jail. And I understand here in Harris County they release them at midnight, where they don't have access to the bus line or anything. But when someone gets released from jail and perhaps they qualify for SSI benefits or Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, there's no transition period. There's nobody helping them to integrate back into society necessarily. And the only way they get that help is if they end up in jail or end up in a hospital. And it's a shame. It's really a shame.
I don't very often praise the federal criminal law system. But the federal prison system, even though they don't really use it effectively, has a policy where for most prisoners, in theory, they should spend their last 6 months out of the prison in a halfway house with supervision, not leaving the halfway house except to go on a job interview or to go to work. When they find a job, they pay part of their salary to the halfway house for room and board until they find a place to live. But it gives them a 6 months period of supervised living and attempts at placement and finding a job. And what we're doing is we put them on a bus in Huntsville. They come to Houston. They're on the street. And a week later, they're arrested again.
And I want to get back to what we were talking about earlier with people that suffer from mental illness. We have, you're right, the last several decades moved from institutionalizing people with mental illness to letting them kind of be out on their own, and we have to get their permission to treat them. And there is a reporter for the Dallas Morning News has written a a series of articles about some of the mentally ill and the homeless in the streets of Dallas, and how we really need to find that happy medium where there is some sort of caretaker kind of looking out for them, but we don't go back to the other extreme of warehousing them, but we're doing what we can to get them the care and the treatment that they need.
Well, if they're mentally ill, they don't belong in a prison.
No, absolutely not.
And that's a waste of our tax dollars. Big, big waste.
Right.
It's a big waste to put people in jail for drugs. Put them in a halfway house. Cut the bill in half. Give people a fighting chance at life.
Yeah.
Putting them in jail, putting them in a cell that's 6 foot wide, 8 foot long for a year, and then put him outside. He's gotten absolutely no help with the problem.
Right.
And what happens a lot of times, if he tries to rent an apartment,
They won't let
the
him.
apartment management runs a criminal background check, and as a convicted felon, they won't rent to him.
It becomes a catch-22.
I know several people that rent places in other people's names for that one reason.
So, it's and I keep coming back to this because more and more I think it's important is that it's time to be smart about crime instead of tough on crime.
And I also want to touch a little bit on, I'd mentioned health care. You know, a lot of health care policies don't cover drug rehabilitation, and if someone isn't gainfully employed, they're not going to have health care insurance.
Right.
And we have 45 million Americans without health insurance, and we have a 30% uninsured rate here in Harris County, where we have some of the best medical care there is there on Fannin. But one of the things I think we should explore is the hospital districts can maybe look at a county coverage plan where on a sliding scale basis someone can get a county coverage plan, a single payer plan that helps cover some of these ailments. And if people don't want to do the county coverage plan, other options might be like a physician co-op where they are paying the medical care providers direct, so we can try and cut down the cost of providing this medical care and make it available and accessible for most of us.
I want to quibble with you here just a little bit, in that we say there are 42 million people or whatever it is in this country without health coverage. The problem is they have health coverage, it's just horribly expensive, horribly the wrong kind.
Right.
What they do is they show up at the emergency room. They get high-level, very expensive acute care. They missed out all of the preventative medicine up to that point. They can't pay for it, so it comes out of general tax dollars.
Right.
It's a case in which we as a society are really being penny wise and pound foolish by refusing to look at ways to pay for universal health care of some kind or another. We instead pour billions of dollars through emergency rooms to pick up the slack.
Yeah, it's just really costly how we go about that. There's no doubt. And I think even the Harris County Hospital District they are doing more outpatient clinics throughout the county, but it takes a lot of resources. So.
Yeah, and I will say this. I think that the Harris County Hospital District is doing a pretty good job of trying to find alternatives to expensive medical emergency room care. We've got time for one last caller, I think. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, hello. It's me again.
Yes.
Individuals that are diagnosed with supposed mental illness and ones that are... Do you think that there's a lot of individuals out there that really take advantage of the institutions? Let's say you get convicted of a murder and you go and say, they really try to take advantage and say, I'm reasoned by mental insanity. Do you think the doctors making them prognosis, do you think, like here in the state of Texas, do you think that they're doing a really good job identifying such individuals?
That's a good question. And I will say this, that in the United States, what we call a person who tries to use the insanity defense in court is convict. Juries don't believe it. It doesn't work as a defense. It's a last stage thing. The one woman here in Harris County that ended up drowning her children is about the only successful mental illness defense I've heard of in years. If anything, what we've got is a worse situation in which the courts simply overlook the issue at all.
And one thing I want to add to that, there are high-profile cases like that instance, but I think most of the expenses involving our law enforcement community and the mentally ill, it's loitering, things that don't involve really high-profile cases. And I also want to add, Buford and Clarence, people that want to learn more about our campaign, they can log on to our website at www.votemcdavid.com. So.
Okay. I think I've been on my soapbox most of the night tonight, so rather than my normal editorial, I just want to stress how important it is this year that everyone get involved in the election process. Research the issues, research the candidates, think about what you want the country, the state, the city to look like, and cast your vote in the most meaningful way possible. And it's up to you to determine what the state of your government and your country will be. And with a minute or two left, do you have any other last words for us?
Well, I do want to say we are planning an Earth Day celebration on Saturday, April the 19th. Details will be available on our website again, votemcdavid.com. So stay tuned if you're interested in participating. We'd love to have anyone interested in coming.
Well, on the same day, Normal is having their 420 Fest at Last Concert Cafe, and we'd like to invite everybody down. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, 420 celebration is a pretty good way to spend an evening and also to support a very worthwhile reform organization. They're good bands, good, fun, interesting people, and maybe even a speaker worth listening to or not. So I want to thank both Clayton for joining us again, as he does frequently, and Virginia Jenny McDavid for coming by to talk to us as she gears up for the coming November. So remember, they're your politicians. You hire them. You can fire them. It's up to you to tell them what to do. So call us and join the show, but much more importantly, call, write, and go see your elected representatives at all levels of government. Thank you and good night.
Present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is a less dangerous drug.